The church bells had never sounded so cruel. Their chime echoed across the small town in rural America, bright and cheerful for the world outside. But each note landed like a knife in the chest of the woman standing at the altar. She was dressed in white lace, stretched across shoulders, broad enough to carry hay bales with ease, her veil fluttering around, a face both beautiful and intimidating. She was 6 feet 6 inches tall, her frame towering over every guest in the room, and she was about to be abandoned in the most humiliating way possible. Her groom's hands trembled as he stared up at her. He was a man who had once sworn love, who had once whispered promises of forever. But now his eyes darted to the whispers, rippling through the pews, to the smirks and stifled laughter, to the glow of cell phone screens already lifted to record. The congregation had not come to witness love. They had come to watch a spectacle. "She looks like a linebacker," a woman in the front row muttered, not even bothering to lower her voice. "Who could kiss someone like that?" Another guest whispered, and the words reached the bride's ears like a cruel echo. The groom took a step back. The bride's heart thudded, hoping he was only adjusting his footing, hoping he would shake it off, take her hand, and prove them all wrong. But his lips pressed into a thin line, and his next words shattered everything. I cannot do this," he stammered, backing away. His eyes refusing to meet hers. Laughter burst from the back rows. Gasps spread like wildfire. Cell phones tilted, higher cameras flashing live streams, rolling as the groom turned, dropped the bouquet he had been meant to hold, and ran down the aisle. The door slammed open, sunlight pouring in as he disappeared into the brightness, leaving her alone in the dim interior, abandoned in front of the world. For one long moment, she stood frozen, every muscle in her massive frame locked in disbelief. The whispers grew louder, like a man in a dress. No wonder he left. Who would want her? She could crush him if she hugged him. Each word carved deeper into her soul. The veil felt like a shroud, the dress like a costume of mockery. She wanted to scream, to beg, to demand that someone stand up for her, but no one did. The priest looked down at his Bible. The bridesmaids shifted uncomfortably, eyes lowered. The guests smirked and filmed. With every second, her humiliation grew. She could feel the tears burning, but she refused to let them fall here. Not here, not in front of these vultures. With a sharp breath, she ripped the veil from her head, balled it in her fist, and lifted her chin higher than anyone else in the room. Without a word, she turned her steps, echoing like thunder, against the wooden floor as she marched down the aisle that had been meant to lead her to happiness. Instead, it carried her into exile. When she pushed open the heavy church doors, the sunlight struck her like judgment. The townspeople gathered outside burst into laughter. Phones clicked. A video was already uploading before she reached the bottom step. By the time she reached the edge of the parking lot, hashtags were blooming online. Giant bride, runaway groom. The clip of the groom sprinting away from her suit. Flapping face pail spread like wildfire across Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. Strangers who had never met her shared comments as though they had the right to judge. She should be in the NFL. Imagine waking up next to that every morning. Poor guy, she would break him in half. Each comment was another stone on her chest. By the time she reached her car, she could hardly breathe. The lace sleeves of her gown ripped as she yanked the door open, stuffing herself into the driver's seat that barely accommodated her frame. She slammed the door, gripped the steering wheel, and for the first time let her tears fall. Inside the church, the whispers turned into conversation, then into entertainment. By evening, the town would talk of nothing else. By night, the video would reach millions. And by morning, she would be known across America not as a woman who loved not as a bride with dreams, but as the giant bride who had been left at the altar. Her name was Evelyn Kane, though almost no one would remember it. She was 28 years old, raised in this very town, the daughter of farmers who had worked the land with pride. She had grown strong not by choice, but by necessity, hauling hay-wrestling machinery, taking over chores when her father's health declined. Her body had grown broad and powerful, her height an inheritance from generations of tall relatives. She had never asked to stand above the heads of other women. She had never asked for arms that made men glance twice. But the world had never let her forget. High school had been cruel. College had been lonelier. Men either fetishized her or mocked her. She had thought she had found someone different in Peter, the man who had just fled. He had courted her gently spoken of love beyond appearances, and for a moment she had believed him. Now she knew the truth. He had loved the idea of her strength, until the weight of public shame grew too heavy for him to bear. In America, the land of curated beauty, Evelyn was an outlier. Instagram feeds were filled with sculpted bodies, filtered faces, and ideals of perfection. Magazines promoted endless diets, workouts, and surgeries. Every billboard whispered that women should be slim, delicate, and small. Evelyn was none of those things. She was vast. She was powerful. She was a woman out of step with her culture, and for that she was condemned. The news channels picked up the story. Talk show hosts chuckled, playing the clip on loop. Social media mocked her endlessly, some voices cruel, others pitying, but none kind. She became a meme overnight, her heartbreak transformed into entertainment for millions. And yet, within the humiliation, a seed of defiance began to sprout. Alone in her car, veil discarded on the passenger seat, makeup streaking down her cheeks, Evelyn clenched her fists. The world had laughed at her, but she would not let them see her break. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "I will not be destroyed by this." The words were fragile, but they were real. She drove away from the church, away from the cameras, away from the humiliation. The farmland stretched out around her golden fields, waving in the summer wind. Somewhere in that horizon was a future she had not yet imagined. Somewhere lay a chance to prove that she was more than a headline, more than a body for strangers to ridicule. But for now, all she had was the silence of her car, the echo of cruel laughter in her ears, and the heavy knowledge that in less than 24 hours, she had become a viral joke in a society that thrived on tearing down anyone who dared to be different. Her story was only beginning, though she did not know it yet. The world had chosen to name her the giant bride, abandoned and disgraced. But fate was preparing something far greater, and someone was about to enter her life who would challenge everything she believed about herself, about love, and about the cruel standards of the society that had cast her aside. Evelyn did not return to the small apartment she had rented in town. After the church humiliation, she drove straight through familiar back roads until the worn wooden gate of her childhood farm appeared at the end of a gravel lane. The property had been left to her after her parents' deaths, but grief and the burden of memories had kept her away. Now stripped of dignity and reputation, she had nowhere else to go. The farmhouse sagged with neglect, shutters broken, weeds crawling over the porch. Yet it was the only place where she could hide from the stares of strangers and the relentless cruelty of social media. When she stepped inside, the air smelled of dust and old timber, and her footsteps echoed in rooms that had once rung with her father's booming laugh and her mother's gentle humming. She dropped her ripped veil onto the kitchen counter and leaned against the sink, trembling from exhaustion and the weight of a new, unwanted fame. By morning, her phone was flooded with messages, some from old classmates, others from strangers. Half were mocking, the rest pretended sympathy, but dripped with curiosity. Headlines screamed across online platforms. Runaway groom leaves giant bride at the altar. Talk shows replayed the clip, comedians mimicked her walk, and commenters compared her to movie monsters. Her humiliation had gone national, and she had no control over the narrative. She deleted her apps, turned the phone face down, and stared at the peeling wallpaper, feeling the ache of a world that had chosen to laugh instead of understand. For days she wandered the farm like a ghost. She walked through empty barns, brushed dust from old tractors, and stared out at fields overrun with weeds. Every corner held memories of work and family, of sweat in summer and firelight in winter. She had once loved this land fiercely, but it reminded her now of all the ways she had been shaped into something society despised. Strong arms, broad shoulders, endless endurance. These qualities had kept her family alive, but they had turned her into a spectacle in a culture that demanded women shrink themselves. Neighbors drove by slowly, their windows rolled down, their eyes curious. She heard whispers in town that the giant bride had returned to her farm. Children laughed as they passed the gate. Adults shook their heads with pity or scorn. At the grocery store, she overheard an old man murmur that one will never find a husband. Best she stay alone. Each comment pierced her, though she pretended not to hear. At night, she lay awake in the upstairs bedroom that had once been hers as a girl. The ceiling beams stretched above her like skeletal fingers. She listened to the wind rattle loose shutters and wondered if this would be her life, mocked, forgotten, isolated on land too broken to save. Loneliness pressed heavier than the ridicule. Beneath the layers of anger and shame, she longed for connection, for a touch that was not mocking, for a voice that did not carry pity. She remembered how it had felt during the brief months with Peter to imagine a future with someone who looked past her height and strength. Now that hope seemed foolish, a trick played by a man who had abandoned her when the eyes of others became too sharp. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, she stood in the barn doorway and whispered words she had never dared to say aloud. If no man wants me, then I'll find someone who has no choice. The sound of her own voice startled her. It was raw-edged with desperation, yet it carried a strange power. She had spent her life letting others dictate her worth. Perhaps it was time to seize it, even if the world thought her monstrous. The phrase clung to her thoughts like a dark vow. Days turned into weeks. Evelyn cleaned the farmhouse slowly, scrubbing away dust, repairing broken boards, mending curtains. Her hands remembered every task, the rhythm of work comforting in its familiarity. She repaired fences in the pasture, her towering figure visible from the road, drawing more whispers from neighbors who shook their heads at her efforts. They thought she was rebuilding a prison for herself. She thought she was building a fortress. Yet the loneliness gnawed deeper. Work filled the daylight hours, but silence devoured the nights. She ate dinners alone at the long wooden table, hearing in memory the laughter of her parents and the imagined sound of children she might never have. She watched couples in town, holding hands, their casual intimacy slicing her like knives. She avoided the mirror, unable to bear the reflection of the woman the world mocked. Her only companions were the crows circling the fields and the stray cat that sometimes wandered into the barn. One afternoon, she drove into town for supplies. The whispers followed her through every aisle. 2 teenagers filmed her from behind stacks of cereal boxes, giggling as they whispered, "That's her." Evelyn pretended not to notice, but rage coiled in her stomach. At the checkout, the cashier hesitated before bagging her groceries eyes wide, as if expecting her to crush the counter with her bare hands. She returned to the farm, slammed the truck door, and let out a guttural cry that echoed across the empty land. Tears came again, bitter and scalding, but beneath them burned something harder: defiance. She was tired of being a joke. She was tired of giving her power to the sneers of others. If they thought she was a giant, she would live like one. She would no longer beg for acceptance. The vow she had whispered grew louder inside her. She repeated it each night, a mantra that hardened into resolve. If no man wants me, then I'll find someone who has no choice. She imagined a faceless stranger, someone who could not turn away, someone who would be forced to see beyond the body that frightened everyone else. The thought both frightened and emboldened her. It was madness, perhaps, but madness was better than despair. Life at the farm settled into a rhythm of work and silence. She woke at dawn, repaired fences, cleared fields, and mended the farmhouse piece by piece. Her hands blistered her back, ached, but the labor grounded her. In moments of exhaustion, she almost felt peace, the same peace her father had once found in the sweat of honest work. But the nights were still cruel, headlines still circulated, new memes emerged weekly. Her towering frame edited into comic scenes, her face used as punchlines. Sometimes she wanted to smash her phone into pieces, but a part of her could not look away. She read the comments punishing herself with every word. Yet in the midst of cruelty, she found rare glimmers. A woman commented, "She is beautiful, strong, men are cowards." Another wrote, "I wish I had her courage to stand tall." These voices were drowned in the flood of mockery, but they were there, small sparks in the dark. Evelyn clung to them, though she did not believe them yet. Alone in her bedroom, she whispered again, "If no man wants me, then I'll find someone who has no choice." The vow no longer sounded like despair. It sounded like a promise to herself, a promise that one day someone would see her not as a joke, not as a spectacle, but as a woman worthy of love. She did not yet know that destiny was already moving toward her in the form of a man who had wealth beyond imagination and wounds that matched her own. Their meeting would not be gentle. It would collide like storm fronts, violent and unavoidable. But it would begin here in the silence of a farmhouse, where a giant bride had been abandoned and where she forged a vow that would change everything. The storm that brought him into her life rolled across the plains with a fury that reminded Evelyn of her own heart. It had been another long day, repairing fence posts, her hands blistered from gripping the hammer, when the clouds gathered black and low. Wind bent the grasses flat, and the air crackled with the scent of rain. She was just dragging tools toward the barn when she heard the low growl of an engine straining on the mud road that bordered her farm. Through the curtain of rain, she saw a sleek black SUV half buried in the muck, its wheels spinning uselessly. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out, cursing under his breath, as rain plastered his shirt to his frame. He was tall by ordinary standards, but when Evelyn approached, he looked up startled, as if confronted by a figure from myth. She was soaked hair clinging to her cheeks, her body outlined by the clinging fabric of a work shirt and jeans boots sinking in mud. He froze, half blinded by rain and awe. She said nothing at first, only took in the sight of him, the expensive watch on his wrist, the polished leather shoes ruined by mud, the way he looked more suited to a boardroom than a country road. "You will not get it out like that," she called over the wind. He blinked, surprised at her voice. "I did not see anyone around." "Can you help?" His tone carried frustration, but also a trace of embarrassment. She waded into the muck, motioned him aside, and placed her hands against the back of the vehicle. With a grunt, she pushed muscles coiling her boots, digging into the road. The SUV lurched free of the rut, as if it weighed nothing at all. The man stared speechless, water dripping from his hair into his eyes. Evelyn stepped back, breath steady despite the effort. She wiped rain from her brow and said, "Next time, do not drive a city car onto farm roads." His laughter came unbidden, half disbelief and half admiration. "You just did what 3 men and a tow truck could not." She shrugged as if it were nothing. "I have been doing this all my life." For a moment they stood in the rain, the storm pounding around them. Silence charged with something unspoken. He extended his hand, rain-slick between them. "My name is Daniel." She hesitated before taking it. "Evelyn." He did not flinch at her grip, though it enveloped his. Instead, he studied her face, as if trying to memorize every line. She pulled her hand back quickly, uncomfortable under the weight of his gaze. "You should get moving before the road washes out," she said. He nodded, but instead of leaving, he asked, "Do you live nearby? Maybe I can repay you for the help." Her laugh was short and bitter. "You do not want to be seen with me." His brow furrowed. "Why would you say that?" She turned from him, the rain hiding the heat in her eyes. "You will find out soon enough." Without another word, she strode back toward her barn, her figure swallowed by the storm. Daniel watched her go, something stirring inside him that he could not explain. He had met countless women, models, heiresses, polished diamonds of high society. None had struck him like this woman, soaked in rain, fierce and unyielding. He drove away, but his thoughts stayed behind with her. He did not know she was already infamous, the giant bride mocked across every newsfeed. He did not know she was the very woman whose viral humiliation he had glimpsed on television, but not recognized in the flesh. He only knew that when she pushed his car free and looked at him with eyes that dared him to mock her, he had felt something shift. Evelyn returned to her farmhouse, dripping and shivering, furious at herself for speaking at all. She had wanted to remain hidden, to vanish from the world that scorned her. But now a stranger had seen her strength, and worse, he had not recoiled. He had looked at her as though she was not a joke, not a meme, but a person worth seeing. She told herself it meant nothing, that he was only a passerby she would never meet again. Yet as she peeled off her wet clothes and listened to the storm batter the windows, she could not banish the image of his eyes steady and searching even as the rain fell between them. She whispered into the empty house, almost in anger, "Do not hope, do not be fooled again." But a spark had been lit, and no storm could put it out. The storm passed, but Daniel returned the next day. Evelyn was in the barn repairing a broken stall when she heard the crunch of tires on gravel. She froze, praying it was a delivery truck. But when she stepped into the light, she saw the same sleek SUV and the same man, stepping out dressed this time in jeans and a plain jacket, though nothing could disguise the polish in the way he carried himself. He smiled as if the storm had been an introduction, and today was a continuation. She frowned. "You should not be here." He tilted his head. "I thought I owed you thanks. Maybe coffee, maybe just a proper conversation without rain." She tightened her grip on the hammer in her hand. "You do not understand. People talk. They will see your car at my farm and think things." His smile faded slightly. "What things?" Her laugh was sharp. "You really do not know who I am." She dropped the hammer onto the bench with a clang. "I am the joke the whole country is laughing at. The giant bride. The one left at the altar." His eyes widened. Recognition flickered. He had seen the clip everyone had. He remembered laughing uncomfortably when it played on television, telling himself it was cruel but moving on. Now the woman from the clip stood in front of him, real and raw. "That was you," he murmured. "Yes," she snapped. "That was me, so go. Leave before someone photographs you and turns you into another punchline." Instead of retreating, he stepped closer. "I do not care what people say." She narrowed her eyes. "You should. Your life will be ruined if they think you are with me." He shook his head. "You saved me yesterday. I want to know you, not the version of you they turned into a meme." Her chest tightened. No one had spoken to her like that since before Peter. Yet fear turned her words bitter. "You want to know me? Fine. Then know this. I am tired of men who play games. Tired of being left when it matters. If you step into my life, you will not leave." Her voice trembled as she added the words that had haunted her since the night she made the vow. "You are going to have sex with me." Silence crashed between them, heavier than the storm had been. Daniel blinked, stunned, as if the air had been punched from his lungs. He had expected anger, rejection, perhaps even tears. Not this. Her words were not seductive, not playful. They were a weapon forged from desperation, from loneliness, from a lifetime of rejection. She stood tall, defiant, daring him to laugh. He did not. He searched her face, saw the pain hiding behind her eyes. The way her jaw trembled, even as she held herself like stone. Slowly, he said, "That is not what I came here for." She barked a bitter laugh. "Of course not. No one ever comes for me. They come to laugh, to use me, to leave me. But I will not let that happen again. If you want to stand here, if you want to look at me like I am worth something, then prove it. Stay." Daniel's pulse pounded. He could have turned away, climbed back into his SUV and vanished, but something anchored him. The memory of her pushing his car free, the fire in her eyes, the dignity with which she had walked away yesterday. He stepped closer until only a breath separated them. "I am not here to mock you. I am not here to run." She shook her head, disbelief etched across her features. "You all say that, and then you go when the world laughs too loud." His voice hardened. "I am not them." For a long moment they stood in the barn rain, dripping from the eaves, dust swirling in the sunlight. Her hammer lay forgotten. She crossed her arms, every muscle tense. Finally she said, quieter now, Why are you here then? His answer surprised even himself. Because I want to understand you. She looked away, unable to hold his gaze. You will not like what you find. He smiled faintly. Then let me decide that. She let out a shaky breath. You should not get involved with me. My name is Poison. My face is a joke. Every time I step outside, people whisper. He lifted his chin, then let them whisper. Her throat tightened. She turned from him, but he reached out and touched her arm, gentle despite her size. She flinched, not from pain, but from the unfamiliarity of a touch that was not cruel or mocking. He withdrew immediately. I am sorry, I did not mean to. She stopped him with a shake of her head. No, it has been a long time since anyone touched me without disgust. The confession broke something inside her. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them away. Daniel's gaze softened. Evelyn, you are not what they say. You are strong. You are remarkable. If they cannot see that it is their blindness, not yours. Her laugh was bitter again. Words, they are always words. Peter had words too, until he ran from me in front of everyone. Daniel felt anger stir at the mention of her former fiancé. He had read the headlines, but hearing the wound in her voice was different. He wanted to track the man down, confront him, but he stayed focused on her. I am not Peter. She met his eyes again, searching for mockery, for pity. She found none. Only sincerity that unsettled her more than laughter ever had. Why, she whispered, why are you really here? He hesitated. He could not tell her the truth, not yet. That he was Daniel Ward, billionaire investor, a man whose face had been on magazine covers, a man who had fled his own world to find quiet in the countryside. If she knew, she might think he was here for sport, another game played by a rich man. So he said instead, because I needed help yesterday, and you gave it. Because you pushed my car out of the mud like it weighed nothing. Because when I looked at you, I did not see a joke. I saw someone I could not ignore. Evelyn's heart thudded painfully. She wanted to believe him, but belief had betrayed her before. She whispered, if you stay, you will regret it. He answered firm, then let me regret it. For the first time she had no reply. Silence stretched between them, but it was no longer heavy with anger. It was fragile, uncertain, a thin bridge between despair and possibility. She turned back to her work, lifting the hammer with shaking hands. He did not leave. He leaned against the stall, watching her work not with mockery, but with quiet respect. And though she kept her eyes on the wood, she could feel his gaze like warmth against her skin. For the first time since the church bells had condemned her, Evelyn felt something stir inside that was not anger or shame. It was small, dangerous, but real. Hope. Daniel kept coming back to the farm. At first, he brought small things, excuses, really like a box of nails, when he saw her repairing fences or bags of seed she had not asked for. Evelyn bristled, each time suspicious of his motives, but she let him stay longer and longer. Days blurred into weeks, and though she told herself not to trust him, his presence began to carve out a hollow in her loneliness. He watched her work with the kind of attentiveness she had never known from anyone. When she lifted beams or carried hay bales, he did not flinch or make jokes. He simply admired the ease of her strength. Sometimes he helped, though, his soft hands betrayed, a man who had never truly worked the land. She noticed, and curiosity began to simmer in her. One evening, as they sat on the porch with the sun sinking behind golden fields, she finally added, "Who are you really?" He sipped from the glass of water she had given him, eyes steady on the horizon. Just someone who needed a place away from the noise. The answer was too simple. She studied him the way his shirts never had patches. The faint accent of money in his speech, the way he looked at her not with fear, but with the calm of a man used to power. "You do not belong here," she said. He turned a small smile on his lips. "Neither do you according to them." She froze at that, because it was true. In town, she was still the giant bride, the subject of whispers and cruel laughter. Every trip to the grocery store reminded her of the gulf between her and everyone else. Daniel's words cut through her defenses, binding them with a thread of shared exile. Yet the truth was heavier. Daniel was Daniel Ward, billionaire entrepreneur, whose investments shaped entire industries. He had slipped away from boardrooms and flashing cameras under the guise of a quiet retreat, wanting to breathe air not polluted by ambition and betrayal. He had loved once, or thought he had, a woman of dazzling beauty, a socialite who had whispered promises into his ear. She had vanished with another man the moment she realized Daniel's money came with expectations of loyalty. Since then, he had been pursued by faces that saw him as a bank account, not a man. He had come to the countryside searching for something real, something untouched by greed. Evelyn did not know this yet. To her, he was simply Daniel, a stranger who looked at her as if she was not a monster. One afternoon, as they worked side by side to mend a collapsed section of fence, she asked the question again. "You are not like the men from around here. What are you hiding?" He laughed softly. "Maybe I am hiding that I am tired. Tired of being used, tired of being watched. Maybe I wanted to find someone who does not care about money." She stiffened. Money is the only thing anyone cares about in this world. Her eyes hardened. "I was left because of how I look. You were used because of what you have. Either way, we are both not enough." His smile faded, and the air between them grew taut with unspoken truth. They did not speak for a while, the sound of hammering filling the silence. Later that week, she dared to invite him into the farmhouse. He looked around the worn furniture, the photos of her parents still hanging crooked on the walls, and he felt a pang of something he had not felt in years: home. She watched him as he touched the frame of a family portrait. His face softened. For a fleeting moment, she thought she saw loneliness in him as raw as her own. The town noticed. Whispers began again when the SUV was spotted near her farm more than once. Paparazzi had not yet found him, but neighbors posted pictures online. "The giant bride has a lover," one caption read. The news traveled fast. Evelyn's humiliation reignited as memes circulated, mocking her all over again. This time the cruel comments stung less, not because they were softer, but because she knew Daniel would see them. She feared he would turn away, that the glare of ridicule would burn him like it had burned Peter. Instead, he knocked on her door the next morning with groceries in hand. She almost slammed it in his face. "Have you seen what they are saying?" she demanded. He nodded. "I have." "Then why are you here?" Her voice cracked. "Do you want to be ruined with me?" He stepped inside without waiting for permission. "I do not care what they think." She stared at him, trembling with rage and disbelief. "You will care when your friends laugh, when your family mocks you, when your world turns against you." He met her eyes steadily. "They already mock me for other things. They already use me. This is different." She sank onto a chair, burying her face in her hands. You do not know what it is like to be laughed at by millions. His heart twisted. He did know in a way. Every magazine cover, every rumor about his wealth, every headline about women chasing him had made him into a caricature. He crouched in front of her, lifting her chin gently. And you do not know what it is like to be loved for money instead of yourself. We both have scars. She blinked, stunned at the vulnerability in his tone. Loved for money, she repeated. That is not love. Exactly, he whispered. Their gazes locked, and for the first time, Evelyn saw not just kindness in him, but recognition, a mirror of her own isolation. She whispered, if they knew who you really were. Her voice trailed off. He hesitated, tempted to reveal himself, but fear held him back. Not fear of her judgment, but fear that the purity of their fragile bond would collapse under the weight of his name. So he said only, then let them not know. Not yet. Evelyn leaned back, torn between suspicion and longing. One day you will regret this. He smiled faintly. Then let that day come, for now I am here. In that moment, surrounded by the silence of the farmhouse, they both understood that the world outside would not forgive them. She was a woman mocked for her body. He was a man hiding behind anonymity. Together they were a defiance of the society that demanded perfection and conformity. Their bond was fragile, but it was real. And for both Evelyn and Daniel, real was worth any risk. It began with a single photo. A teenager driving past the farm had snapped a blurry image of Daniel stepping out of his SUV with groceries in his hands and Evelyn towering beside him at the gate. The caption read, "The giant bride has company," and within hours it spread across social platforms. The memes came fast, crueler than ever. They drew cartoons of her cradling him, like a doll of him trapped in her fist of wedding cakes, collapsing under her weight. Evelyn had tried to grow numb, but the resurgence cut deep because now the ridicule dragged Daniel into the storm. His face appeared beside hers in headlines. Mystery man seen with giant bride. Who is he? Speculation swirled. Some claimed he was a fetishist, others that he was being blackmailed, others that he was a fool. Every insult Evelyn had borne alone was now turned on him. Panic clawed at her chest. She confronted him on the porch one evening, her phone thrust in his face. Look at this. Look what they are saying about you. You need to leave. You need to protect yourself. He read the words without flinching. Let them talk. Her voice broke. You do not understand. They will destroy you like they destroyed me. Your job, your reputation, your family. You cannot be tied to me. He set the phone down and looked at her steadily. Do you think I care about strangers on the internet? Do you think their laughter defines me? She wanted to believe him, but fear was stronger. Memories of Peter fleeing the altar haunted her. She shoved him back with trembling hands. You will lose everything if you stay. I cannot let you. His eyes burned with quiet fire. Evelyn, I have already lost what mattered. My so-called friends only want my money. My family only wants to control me. Strangers gossip whether I breathe or not. But you are real. She shook her head, tears spilling. You say that now. But when the pressure comes, you will run too. I cannot survive that again. She turned away, gripping the porch railing until her knuckles whitened. Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. I am not Peter. I am not the men who mocked you. I am here because I choose to be. She closed her eyes, fighting the war inside. Every instinct told her to push him away, to save him from the ridicule that consumed her. yet some fragile part of her ached to believe. The world outside did not relent. Paparazzi arrived within days, hungry for a headline. They camped on the road, long lenses aimed at the farmhouse. Trucks slowed to gawk. Neighbors whispered more loudly. Evelyn barely left the property, each step beyond her gate, captured and ridiculed online. Daniel became more secretive, slipping in and out, at odd hours his SUV a beacon for attention. Evelyn's dread grew until one night she exploded. "You have to stop coming here. It is killing me to see you dragged down with me." He stared at her jaw tight. "Do you want me to go because of them or because of you?" She faltered, unable to answer. He pressed say it. "If you do not want me here, I will leave. But if you are only pushing me away because of them, then you are letting them win." Her voice cracked. "They are stronger than us." His reply was fierce. "No, they are loud. That is not the same as strong." She collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands. "I do not know how much more I can take." He crouched beside her, pulling her hands away gently. "Then let me carry some of it." Her heart twisted at his words. For weeks she had fought alone, convinced that burden was hers to bear. Hearing him offer to share it was almost unbearable. She whispered, "I am afraid." He touched her cheek softly. "So am I. But fear means it matters." Outside, the pressure mounted. A tabloid published his name after tracing his SUV's registration. The revelation sent shockwaves. Daniel Ward, billionaire investor, was the man at the giant bride's side. The news exploded across every major outlet. Commentators debated endlessly. Was it a publicity stunt? Was she blackmailing him? Was he indulging in some strange obsession? Evelyn's worst nightmare had come true. Now it was not just ridicule, but global spectacle. She begged him to deny it, to claim it was a mistake, but he refused. "I will not lie about knowing you," she shouted. "Then they will crucify you." He answered calmly, "Let them. I am tired of living in their cage." For the first time, Evelyn saw the weight he carried too. Different but parallel to her own. He was shackled by expectations of wealth and power, as she was shackled by mockery and shame. Both of them had been trapped by a society that decided what they were worth. Now both were defying it. Still, the fear gnawed at her. One evening, as cameras flashed from the road and voices jeered from beyond the gate, she broke down completely. She pushed him away again, screaming, "I cannot let you throw your life away for me. Go back to your world. Leave me in mine." Her sobs shook the farmhouse. Daniel stood still, his face pale but his resolve unbroken. He said only, "I will not leave until you make me believe you do not want me here." She collapsed to her knees, whispering through tears, "I do not know what I want." He knelt beside her, his hand hovering near hers but not forcing contact. "Then let us find out together." The words cut through the chaos like a lifeline. She looked at him, rain streaking the windows behind him, and for a moment the noise of the world faded. But outside the headlines roared louder, the judgment harsher, and the storm of scrutiny showed no sign of ending. The pressure finally reached its breaking point when Daniel stood in front of a wall of cameras in New York. The story had grown too large to ignore. Investors were asking questions, his family was in uproar, and Evelyn was spiraling under the constant ridicule. For days she had begged him to deny her to protect himself, but Daniel knew that silence was letting the world write their story for them. So he called a press conference. He wore no tie, his suit plain, his expression resolute. Flashbulbs exploded as he stepped up to the podium. "You want to know the truth," he said, his voice steady. "Then here it is. The woman you have mocked, the woman you call the giant bride, is someone I care for deeply. Not because of a stunt, not because of blackmail, not because of some game, because she is stronger, kinder, and more real than anyone I have met in years. You call her a joke. I call her extraordinary." The room erupted in chaos. Reporters shouted questions, cameras clicked furiously. Daniel lifted his hand for silence. "Yes, I am Daniel Ward. Yes, I am a billionaire. But money has never bought me. Love never bought me peace. Evelyn Kane has given me both by simply being herself. If that offends you, then so be it. I will not apologize for who I choose to love." His words reverberated across every screen in America within the hour. News anchors replayed the clip. Social media exploded. Half the voices sneered louder, claiming insanity or scandal. But the other half voices that had been silent rose in support. Women who had faced body-shaming men who had been mocked for appearance, people who had lived under the cruelty of public judgment, began to rally behind them. Evelyn watched the broadcast from her farmhouse trembling. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She had been sure he would crumble, that he would cast her aside to protect his empire. Instead, he had stood before the world and chosen her. That night, he drove hours back to the farm, cameras trailing him, until he lost them on back roads. When he arrived, she was waiting on the porch, eyes red from crying. He stepped out of the car, and before he could speak, she whispered, "Why did you do it?" He walked toward her, every step deliberate. "Because I will not let them define you or me." I needed them to hear it from my own mouth. Her hands shook as she reached for him. "They will hate you for this." He took her hands, steadying them. "They already do. But I would rather be hated for the truth than loved for a lie." She broke then, leaning into him, letting herself be held. For the first time, she did not feel enormous or grotesque. She felt small enough to be safe, human enough to be loved. He pressed his forehead against hers and whispered, "I meant every word. You are extraordinary." Her heart ached with the fear of hope, but hope bloomed anyway. The next morning, headlines blazed with division. Some outlets mocked them harder, others praised Daniel's courage. Society split in two, but for Evelyn, the world had shifted. She was no longer only the giant bride abandoned at the altar. She was the woman a billionaire had stood beside in front of the world. For the first time since the church bells, she felt the weight of shame begin to lift, replaced by the fragile beginnings of belief. The backlash came swift and merciless. Within days of Daniel's revelation, his board of directors called emergency meetings. His family sent emissaries, and every financial channel speculated on the downfall of Ward Enterprises. Reporters camped outside his Manhattan offices, demanding comment, while society columnists painted Evelyn as a grotesque interloper who threatened to topple an empire. Evelyn saw it all on her phone, every headline screaming her name, every commentator dissecting her body as though she were livestock at auction. The weight was unbearable. She began to withdraw, answering Daniel's calls with curt words, refusing to see him when he drove back to the farm. "You need to save yourself," she said one night over the phone, her voice hollow. "Cut me loose before it is too late." His reply was steel, "Never." But she hung up, convinced she was protecting him. That week, Daniel's board confronted him in a glass tower high above the city. Old men in suits warned him of ruin, of stockholders abandoning, ship of reputations crumbling. His own mother sat at the head of the table, eyes cold as she said, "If you do not end this farce, you will destroy everything your father built." Daniel stood hands braced on the table. "If you think I will discard the woman I love to protect numbers on a screen, you do not know me at all." Gasps circled the room, but he walked out without looking back. That same night, a storm ripped across the plains where Evelyn sat alone in her farmhouse. She had locked the doors, turned off her phone, and tried to convince herself that solitude was safer. Lightning split the sky. Thunder rattled the windows. When a pounding came at the door, she thought it was the wind until his voice rose above the storm. "Evelyn." Her heart stopped. She opened the door to find him, drenched hair plastered to his face suit, soaked through eyes blazing with determination. "What are you doing here?" she shouted over the roar of rain. "You will ruin everything." He stepped forward, water streaming down his face. "Everything is already ruined if I lose you." She shook her head, tears mixing with rain. "You cannot mean that. You will regret me." He dropped to his knees in the mud, his hands clutching hers. The storm howled around them, but his voice was steady. "You once told me I was going to have sex with you, but what I really want is a life with you." Her breath caught. The words hit harder than the thunder. He looked up at her eyes burning with truth. "I love you, Evelyn. Not despite who you are, but because of who you are. You are stronger than any storm, stronger than the world's laughter. And I would rather spend one day beside you in this mud than a lifetime in their gilded cages." She collapsed to her knees in front of him, the mud soaking her gown, sobs racking her chest. For so long she had been mocked, abandoned, treated as less than human. Yet here was a man, with everything willing to throw it away, just to stay. She touched his face, trembling. "You will lose everything." He kissed her hand, "Then let it be gone, because none of it matters without you." The storm raged, but neither moved. In that moment, the noise of the world faded, leaving only the truth between them. She whispered, "I love you too." And as the lightning lit the sky, their lips met, sealing a vow no storm could wash away. The storm passed, but its memory lingered as Evelyn and Daniel began the work of rebuilding not only their lives, but the land that had once symbolized her isolation. Instead of running from the ridicule, they leaned into defiance, deciding together that the farm would no longer be a place of shame, but a beacon of strength. Daniel poured capital into the project, not through anonymous checks or distant contractors, but with his own presence, sleeves rolled boots in the dirt beside her. They cleared fields overtaken by weeds, restored the barn to its former glory, and purchased equipment that transformed the land into a model of modern agriculture. Word spread quickly. At first, the locals whispered in suspicion, convinced it was another vanity project. But as jobs opened and wages flowed, suspicion softened into gratitude. Men and women who had once sneered at Evelyn now worked under her guidance, learning that her strength was not monstrous, but essential. She taught them how to lift, how to endure, how to take pride in work that fed communities. For the first time, her size was not mocked but respected. National media tried to twist the story into scandal, but the images coming from the farm told another tale. Photographs of Evelyn leading teams in the fields. Daniel at her side, children laughing in the background, shifted the narrative. The giant bride became the giant guardian, a woman who had taken ridicule and turned it into leadership. Evelyn still battled doubt. Some nights she sat on the porch, staring at the horizon, wondering when the laughter would return, when the world would strip away what little peace she had found. But Daniel always sat beside her, taking her hand, reminding her that they had already survived the worst. Together they were stronger than the storm. Slowly she began to believe. The farm flourished. A cooperative was formed connecting nearby towns through fair trade agreements that Daniel structured but Evelyn enforced with iron resolve. They refused to let greed or prejudice poison their work. Families who had once laughed at her now sent their children to learn from her. Farmers sought her counsel. Newspapers ran stories not of scandal, but of resilience. For Evelyn, the transformation was not only external, but internal. She no longer flinched at her reflection. She no longer whispered that vow of despair. She spoke instead of a new promise to live boldly, to love fiercely, to never again apologize for existing. Daniel, too, found redemption. Away from boardrooms and the constant hunger of wealth, he discovered meaning in building something tangible, in choosing love over power. His family still resisted, his board still muttered, but the success of the farm silenced them. Profits were undeniable, but more than that, the image of him standing proudly with Evelyn turned him from a figure of ridicule into one of defiance. They had not only survived, they had thrived. On the day the first harvest festival was held, the farm was alive with music and light. Stalls overflowed with produce, laughter filled the air, and Evelyn walked through it all with her head high, Daniel's hand in hers. The same community that had once labeled her a freak now cheered her name. She was no longer abandoned. She was chosen not just by Daniel, but by a people who had finally seen beyond their prejudice. As night fell and lanterns lit the fields, Evelyn looked around at the land reborn, at the man beside her, and at the faces once hostile, now full of respect. She whispered to herself, not in despair, but in triumph, "I have a life. I have love." And for the first time, she truly believed it. The second wedding was nothing like the first. There was no ornate church, no crowd waiting to gossip, no groom trembling with fear. Instead, it took place on the very farm that had once been Evelyn's exile, and was now her sanctuary. The barn had been adorned with flowers grown in her own fields. Long tables stretched beneath strings of lights, and the air was thick with the scent of harvest. Neighbors, workers, and friends gathered not to sneer but to celebrate. When Evelyn stepped into view in a gown, simple yet radiant, her head held high, silence swept the crowd, not of judgment, but of awe. She was still tall, still broad, still unlike any bride the world had ever tried to imagine, but she was no longer a joke. She was a woman who had endured humiliation and emerged unbroken. Daniel waited for her at the altar they had built together from reclaimed wood, his eyes locked only on hers. When she reached him, he took her hands without hesitation, his voice strong enough to carry over the fields. "The first time I saw you," he said, "the world called you a spectacle. But I saw strength. The first time I heard you, the world called you a joke. But I heard truth. Today I call you my partner, my equal, my love." Tears glistened in Evelyn's eyes as she answered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Once I believed no man would want me. Once I thought I had to force someone to stay. But you showed me I was never unworthy. You showed me that love is not about fitting into the world's small expectations, but about building a world large enough for us both." They sealed their vows with a kiss beneath the open sky, and cheers erupted across the farm. Cameras were present again, but this time they did not belong to gossipers. They were held by journalists documenting a story of redemption, of defiance of love that had defied ridicule. The headlines that followed did not call her the giant bride abandoned at the altar. They called her Evelyn Ward, the woman who transformed mockery into triumph. As the sun dipped and lanterns glowed, Evelyn stood beside Daniel on the farmhouse porch. Watching guests laugh and dance, she felt his arm around her shoulders, grounding her in the present. For years she had been defined by what others thought she lacked. Now she was defined by what they had built together. She whispered barely audible, "No regrets." Daniel smiled, pressing his lips to her hair. Only beginnings. The message of their story spread far beyond the farm. It reminded the world that beauty is not a measurement and love is not a transaction. It is a choice, a defiance, a promise made in the face of laughter and doubt. And as Evelyn looked out across the fields, her heart full, she knew that the bells of her first wedding had marked an ending, but these cheers marked a beginning.